This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your home for investment, economics, and geopolitics. For our publications and archives, go to goldnewsletter.com. Folks, welcome back to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, and I'm excited to have Brian London back joining me this week. And we have a guest, Jayant Bhandari, I'm not sure how you pronounce that last name actually, who is a junior mining analyst and an international commentator on economic issues or lots of things. He also holds a conference each year in Vancouver, which is just capitalism and morality. And we've brought him on because he's been commenting on these bizarre events recently in India, and he's been writing about it at acting-man.com. So, Jayant, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Fergus, thank you very much for having me.
Right, and you're in London right now?
Yeah, I came from India yesterday, and now I'm in London for the next 2 weeks.
Let me try and give the context. You've been writing about the elimination or prohibition of some dollar bill, or not rupee bill, denominations, and there are 500 and 1,000 rupee denominations, which I just looked up on Xe, equal to $7.3 US or about $15 US. So these are very small denominations that have been outlawed. Do you want to give us a sense for how on earth these bills are somehow a crime?
So, Fergus, as you can see in what you just said, 88% of monetary value in circulation has been banned out of existence by Indian Prime Minister Nahendra Modi, who actually did not even have the right to do it, because this is a job of the central bank to do these kind of things. But he banned 88% of currency in circulation, which means that this has brought the whole economy to a standstill. 97% of consumer transactions in that country happens in cash, and that cash is no longer usable. People are struggling. People are trying to get their currency converted. And the poor people, who are 25% of the India's population, do not have ID cards. 50% of people do not have a bank account. And these are the people who are suffering the most, because they can't even get into those lineups to convert their money. They are hungry. They are jobless. Small businesses are failing. The whole country is entering a phase of massive chaos as we speak.
But what has led into this? Because, I mean, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your own background. I mean, how many years of your own life have you lived in India? And now do you have a base in Vancouver, Canada?
Well, I'm a resident of Singapore these days, but okay. I'm a Canadian citizen, and I grew up in India. I still spend a fair bit of my time in India, about 2 to 3 months a year.
In your article, which we're going to link to, of course, you mention problems with the end of the colonial era and this rising, you say, Hindutva? How do you pronounce this, fanatical Hinduism?
Hindutva, yeah. Hindutva, which is Hindu nationalism, has taken over the country, which means that you see, Islamic fanaticism was not really a part of the global problem until about two decades back. It was when Islamic societies were collectivized using the tool of nationalism that it started becoming a problem. Exactly the same thing is happening in India. Hindus are getting collectivized, and these are extremely tribal and irrational people. Once you collectivize them, you create a massive problem for the human society.
You know, Jayant, Brian here. I really wanted to get you on our podcast today because what's going on in India is just a classic laboratory example of economic turmoil and the role that gold plays in an event like this. And to have you, a knowledgeable, libertarian-oriented reporter, really on the spot and being able to tell us and the world exactly what's going on and what the reaction is just extremely valuable. But I also found it very interesting in that your reporting seemed to contradict with a lot of the more mainstream financial reporting that we were seeing. that was reporting how this event would severely dampen gold demand in India. And that just seemed to be precisely the opposite of not only what you were reporting, but what common sense or anyone who knows the role of gold would have predicted.
Well, Brian, see, what is actually going to happen is that no sane person would now like to hold any wealth in cash form. They have completely lost trust in the state. This means that eventually all this extra cash will go into gold and into foreign currencies. And this is an inevitable thing right now. Of course, right now, gold market is suffering because the tax authorities are standing outside the gold shops, who are making it extremely difficult for people to buy and sell gold.
And also, I saw that the prices on gold are going through the roof. I mean, is there now some kind of smuggling of gold into the country?
Right. So, Fergus, you see, because of this crisis that the government has created, people lined up to buy whatever they could buy during the first few days. The gold market got depleted of gold. There was no gold to be bought anymore. And when I last went to the market, you could buy gold for anything between $2,000 to $3,000 an ounce. Wow. That's the price of gold in India. Remember, it takes a while for the smugglers to set up a new system to start bringing in gold. They used to bring in gold using the banned currency, of course. So they have to create a new infrastructure to bring in gold, which will come into existence in a few months' time. But in the meantime, gold market will suffer in India.
So as far as the broader global gold market, we can probably assume that actual physical demand in terms of weight of gold has probably fallen a bit in India, although the dollar value of that gold traded has probably held steady or even risen.
It has risen quite a lot, but volume in essence has indeed fallen because the price has gone through the roof. But also, you see, this country is suffering economically. And when a country suffers economically, people really don't have much savings. This is a hugely indebted society today, and government is increasingly Indian government is becoming a police state right now. And that is making people very afraid of doing anything that might attract attention of the tax authorities.
What are the reporting requirements for the tax authorities? You mentioned that they're standing outside of the gold shops now. Is it reportable if you buy precious metals?
People can always find a way to avoid getting reported. And what you have to do is to break up your transactions in 3 or 4 or 10 transactions, or you can just do a cash transaction to buy gold. And this is what people usually do. Remember, typically the price of gold in the retail market is 5% less than what it should have been when you add up the import duty on international gold price. And the reason is that most of the gold that comes to India comes through smugglers, which means that tax has not been paid on that gold, and a lot of that gold actually trades using cash, not through the official medium.
And of course, gold smuggling has always been one of the primary sources of gold supply and demand in India.
That's absolutely true, and it has become much worse after India imposed a 10 or 11% import duty on import of golds. So now smugglers have an incentive to bring in gold. They pay a huge amount of bribe to Indian army, Indian government, bureaucrats. Everyone is happy except that the gold price is about 10% higher.
Yeah, well, even more so. I mean, the tariff on imported gold was always around 10%, wasn't it? So the smugglers would make that much margin, as it were, if they're able to smuggle gold in. But now it has to be considerably higher.
Oh, they are making an absolute killing. So the government has actually made these corrupt businesses extremely popular, extremely profitable.
I'm just still trying to get my head around how people are functioning with bills that are only worth around $1 each, right? Let's say, is it just 100 rupees is available right now?
Yeah, that is $1.5, yes.
And as you said, half of the country, they don't even have bank accounts, so there'll be no debit cards. How did those in power not see this coming? There would be just an immediate kind of freezing of economic activity because there would be no readily available medium of exchange.
Well, Fergus, you cannot really understand its stupidity and irrationality using reason. The government did not plan anything. They took a decision based on hunch. There is no planning. There is no thinking behind all this. And all the corrupt money has already got converted into new money anyway, because the old currency is being freely traded in the market at 20% discount to its face value, which means hundreds of millions of people are getting employed to line up in queues outside banks to convert the money, which means that workers in factories don't have to go to work in factories anymore. They make better money lining up outside banks. But really, you can't really generate and produce wealth by lining up outside banks.
True. True. So are we going to be seeing an exodus from India anytime soon?
There will exodus of people.
Yes, of people, yeah.
I don't think so. It can easily happen, though. I mean, you never know what will happen. I think India is, as Fergus, we were talking about earlier, I think India will eventually disintegrate into smaller countries just because every institution of that country has continued to deteriorate after English left 69 years back. Judiciary has got deteriorated. It is heavily compromised. Police is not independent, and politics is extraordinarily corrupt, and bureaucrats are lazy and corrupt. So it's an extremely heavy system that does not work on the tribal society of India.
You know, Jayant, one of the lessons from this, I believe, is that people tend to look at gold standard, even inflation as kind of an elitist issue. But what happens is that monetary turmoil, current fiat currency depreciation or devaluations, price inflation, these affect the most vulnerable on the economic ladder. It affects the common man because he does not have the ability to avoid it, to plan around it, to even profit from it. But it's the elites or the people of higher incomes that can even benefit in some cases from higher inflation or at least protect themselves. But the real victims here are the masses, and it's interesting in that you would think it would be an issue that would be taken up by liberals who supposedly are acting on behalf of the common man. But it's the free market at work, and therefore it's a real illustration of what gold can do, and the real value of gold is insurance against just such an event like this.
Well, absolutely. It's the biggest sufferer from this event is the poor people of the country. Tens of millions of people are today going hungry. People have major problems among the poor segment of the society, and that is as much as 50 to 70% of India's population. The salaried middle class and the rich people don't really have a problem. Actually, a lot of things in the market are now selling at 20-25% discount to their earlier prices because there are no buyers for those things. So rich people are benefiting from lower priced vegetables and lower priced food, lower priced commodities. But that is not because the society has produced more, but because they have just deleted 25 to 55% of the population from consuming class. And these are the people who are suffering the most from this event.
And you say that the poor are actually applauding this development?
Well, Brian, this is an extremely irrational society, and they have been told that this is a short-term problem and this will somehow eradicate corruption from Indian society and Indian government. The reality is that I have never in my life met an honest public servant. So there is really no one who is not corrupt. This is all a theater for Modi because he wants to show the world and show to Indians that he can somehow, using the magic wand, reduce corruption in the country. He can't. He's himself an extremely corrupt person. He's after personal glory.
Is this strategy going to be catching on in neighboring countries? I'm hoping not, but are others eyeing the same crackdown?
Well, Fergus, remember, most of that area is very screwed up. Nepal is a banana republic. Bangladesh is a banana republic. Afghanistan and Pakistan are banana republic. And India was somehow left out from this whole thing. That is not to say it is not already a banana republic, but it's becoming a banana republic similar to what Bangladesh and Pakistan are. And this course is inevitable right now. This will happen. I can't see India not becoming a dictatorship within the next few months, I think. And I don't see major civil social issues is starting to happen in India in the very near future.
What has happened to the level of violence or crime? I mean, I assume people are not just going to sit there and go hungry.
And for the first time, the poor people are mobbing shops to loot from the shops. Indian poor people historically did not do these kind of things. And they are now learning the trick that all they have to do is to mob up and the police cannot stop them. They can loot and rob and get away with that.
You know, looking back at the broader picture of the global gold market and the potential implications of this development, I think if we admit that it probably dampened short-term demand in India, over the long term, it's probably going to considerably increase gold demand and usage in India, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. Brian, there's just no other way out because people will now not keep any cash with them. They will not only keep gold, but they will transact using gold. I have talked with people who are now discussing about replacing rupee with gold so that they could transact among themselves using gold biscuits or gold bars.
Would the government actually allow that?
No, government will not allow anything. I mean, that's why Indians are the way they are, and government cannot reduce these things because India is not a very productive economy. I do not invest in India because the returns on investments are very low. Government can force me to invest in something which does not provide me a positive rate of return, but people will find a way to move their money to places where they can earn the highest rate on return, highest return on their investment.
Now, the government's recent attempts to replace physical gold with a paper representation and to, in fact, try and liberate some of the gold that's been stored in temples, etc., that was an abject failure, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a complete failure, and you can see why it failed. Indian government cannot be trusted. They do not understand the concept of property rights, and there's actually no constitutional right that Indians have in terms of private property.
Wow. Now, typically, India consumes, according to the official statistics, about 800 to 900 tons of gold annually, and is one of the largest demand sinks in the world, second only to China, although in the official statistics from the World Gold Council and the like tend to put China and India neck and neck. That's purely because they ignored the Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals in China. But India is vitally important to the global gold market. Demand over the last year or so has fallen off a bit, I think, because of the uncertainty over some of the regimes, the volatility in the value of the rupee and the strength in the U.S. dollar. But on top of that 800 to 900 tons, there's always been some amount of smuggling that's just been not even really estimated, and nobody really knows how much more that has been. I think that from this development obviously will increase demand, gold demand in India, but I'm wondering how much of that will end up on the reported side of the ledger, and how much of that would be the unreported smuggling side. Do you have any insights on that?
Sure. I mean, you see, the biggest incentive is in importing gold through the channels of smuggling. But people, the shopkeepers and bullion traders, still have to import a limited amount of gold through the official channels so that they can keep their papers clean. They cannot have a visible stock of gold which is not imported through official channels, or they will end up paying a huge amount of bribes to the tax authorities. But really, most of the gold comes via smugglers. And that is why you cannot trust the official statistics anyway, because when gold gets bought in Dubai or Bangladesh or Nepal, you don't know whether it's getting consumed in these countries or it's getting shipped to India via smugglers.
Okay, so some of it's actually appearing, but on the books of neighboring countries as far as gold demand.
Anything is possible. You just cannot trust the official statistics on these kind of issues.
And the government will actually profit from this if gold demand surges in the official channels. They'll profit from the taxes.
Yeah, but they will. The reason they impose the tax is not to increase taxes as such, but to improve their collection of bribes.
I see. So it's actually the underground economy that's profiting from this, and they raise the tariffs so that they can collect the bribes. Now, the official argument, of course, has been the trade deficit, that the gold imports, degrade the trade deficit statistics for India, and that's why they were trying to make it official, et cetera, and raising the tariffs on imports. And some of the other rules, didn't they relinquish or loosen some of those requirements on gold usage, and you had a certain amount of time to take raw gold and manufacture it, et cetera, or you had to export 20% of what you imported? Didn't they loosen some of those restrictions?
Yeah, it's extremely hard, Brian, to keep track of the constant rule changing that these people do. They made it extremely difficult for legitimate people to import gold, and that makes it much more easier for smugglers to import gold, just because importing and exporting through the regulations is extremely difficult, paper intensive, bureaucratic, and loss-making.
I'm just confused a little bit because we often hear, this is the problem between reading a blog like yours of on-the-ground critical analysis and then these broader references to India. We hear that India has undergone this modernization, that in the last 20-odd years that India is on the rise. What is wrong with that narrative that is often spread?
So, Fergus, India were Africa one country. India looks worse than Africa in almost every respect. India is an extraordinarily poor and wretched place. More than 50% of people do not have access to water supply, toilet, electricity, or whatever that you can think of. It's an extremely poor country whose per capita GDP is about $1,600. These are hungry, miserable people. The whole thing about India modernizing is a fake news that caters to political correctness of Western people. And they like to believe that a democratic country must do well. India is not doing well. It's a very wretched place. And whatever the imposition of Western institutions is not helping that country at all.
One of the things that I noticed on the Acting Man site wrapping an interview of Jayant was the notation by the author, an example or a comparison made to when Nixon abandoned the gold standard in the U.S. It was an attempt to demonetize gold, and that the authorities, the economists, thought by closing the gold window in the U.S., it would remove the monetary value of gold, and then it would just be valued as an industrial metal. But in fact, the precise opposite happened, because once the gold window closed, it released the central banks to inflate at will. You know, they had no more restraint, so therefore the monetary value of gold only increased. And I think that's an example it's a similar thing we're seeing in India right now, that government decrees to devalue the currency or create economic turmoil only make gold more valuable. And in fact, if the Indian government tries to restrain gold demand, which I think would be, wouldn't you say, Jayant, a pretty obvious move at some point down the line by the government, that it will be ineffective at the very least, and should probably even increase demand for gold by making it harder to obtain.
Absolutely. It is indeed possible, and I think it's inevitable that Modi will come up with a huge amount of restrictions on lives of people over the next few months. As I said earlier, India is rapidly becoming a police state, and all this really means is that people will put more and more of their savings into gold. They will pull out whatever so far they kept in cash or even as investment or even in the banks. A lot of that money will now move towards gold.
Mm-hmm. And in lesson two is that they should have bought gold a few weeks ago, or, when there wasn't this kind of a turmoil. And the time to buy fire insurance is not when your house is on fire. And that's, people say it can't happen here, and they may have said that in India, but it can happen here. And in some ways, it's inevitable in a fiat currency regime that at some point you are going to have these kinds of dislocations, devaluations, because it's always happened. And it's just an example, again, is the true role of gold as insurance against this sort of event and this sort of inevitability in a fiat currency regime.
Yeah, people in India have very rapidly recognized that this paper currency has zero value unless it's supported by regulations of the government. And because you have to depend on this value, because this value has to depend on government imposing its value on the fiat currency, people have learned this very quickly, and indeed, this will happen elsewhere as well in the future. And Indians for sure have learned it so quickly that they will increasingly put more of their cash and savings into gold.
But why didn't people see this coming? I mean, wasn't there writing on the wall that there's going to be chaos? You should stock up now. No, I don't think people saw it coming. But really, the amount of currency that is in cash, the amount of currency that has been banned represents is about 10 to 12% of GDP of the country. So this is not really a huge amount of money. Indians have historically kept most of their excess cash into gold and properties anyway. And this is really a very small part of the whole system, except that it has paralyzed. The banning of currency has paralyzed the economy for no good reason. Yeah, let me round up and say your website is just Jayant Bhandari, but I'm not going to spell the one out, but you can go to the show notes at goldnewsletter.com/podcast, and he also writes at acting-man.com. Now, Jayant, are there any other final remarks? I know you had a capitalism and morality conference this year. I assume that'll be a repeat next year?
It will be. I run it in the last week of July every year, and it is held in Vancouver, Canada.
It's a pleasure, and I look forward to more updates on Acting Man, and so we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, Fawaz.
Thank you, Jayant.
Thank you, Brian.